Don't let me spoil a good time, but the year of our Lord 2016 was 8 years ago. Kids the same age as the iPhone are now celebrating their sweet 16s. In today's America, the past isn't a foreign country, it's an illegal alien, one step away from being deported by the world controllers, bent on ensuring you never know anything they don't want you to remember. How many people, for instance, can still recall the Great Reset? Something scary headlines, something international conferences, the same scaly-faced ancients in pantsuits and ties, the same memes, the same ranting, conscientious objectors, the same life cycle of quote-unquote news fading into the black background, vanishing into the Bermuda Triangle of our stunned collective consciousness, sinking like an anchor, chained to our feet ever deeper into the internet's wide Sargasso Sea. It's the computers who have all the memory now, and all the memories, hours, mountains of it, garbage piles, the records of our every waking moment, lost to us in our narcotized necrosis, but not to the databanks of the unblinking Borg and its unblinking human operators. I'm tempted to say that today the right to keep and bear memories must not be infringed, that today the forming of memories is a revolutionary act. But one of the most important things we have to remember is that remembrance is not a rebellion, but a piety, a duty, an honor, a pillar of the love that allows us to go on, to try again, to protect and defend the bare fundaments of life. The love of the God who created us all and all things, visible and invisible, whose grace and unearned forgiveness puts the universe in formation each instant of each moment of each hour of each day. We're going deep today with Michael Rectenwald, the top chronicler and huge nemesis of the Great Reset. I am James Poulos, and this is Zero Hour. Well, he's the author of 12 books and a distinguished fellow at Hillsdale College. Michael has taught at universities from NYU to Duke to Carnegie Mellon. His academic and popular writings are to be found pretty much everywhere, from Cambridge University Press to the Washington Post. A PhD in literature and culture, he has appeared on Tucker, Glenn Beck, Laura Ingraham, zillions more, spoken to fawning audiences from Turning Point to Hillsdale to the conservatives and libertarians at Microsoft. On top of all that, he is a former, I repeat, former Marxist. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here, James. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, we only have 4 of your books here, plenty more in the stack. Prolific authorship, near and dear to my heart. I've got a few of them are on the shelf here. But gosh, how do you do 12? And we're talking like there's a novel, there's sort of deep academic stuff. You're kind of covering the bases. How do you go from 0 to 12?
With writing, it's like the beginning is like always chiseling in granite. It's tough. It's always the same process. Until you get rolling, it's misery. But it just starts to, I get into a rhythm of like 12, 15-hour days where I'm writing and I hardly eat. And sometimes I don't even get up. And
so the more pain, the more the gain.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, you must have toughened up over the course of reading what every dyed-in-the-wool Marxist has to read as a young. This is like hundreds and hundreds of pages of extremely dense text.
Dense, abstruse, and utterly useless when it comes down to it, except for understanding, where these people are coming from and what they think.
Well, walk us through this. You are first introduced to, I don't know if it was, the 1848 or the German ideology or, whatever it was, sort of the great gateway Marxist drug for you. But you go in, you start swimming around in the water, it starts to make sense. Or, paint for us, this picture of kind of what is it that led you in and what is it that led you out?
Oh, that's a great question. So, you mentioned the German ideology. That was a very instrumental book because that laid down the materialist conception of history. And to me, that was, that was like revolutionary ideologically and ideationally. I thought it was just an amazing way of understanding, history and human cognition and, effectively he takes everything and flips it on its head, takes Hegel and flips it on its head. And he starts into, with Engels, he starts into this whole different way of understanding time. And that was very intriguing to me. But it took many, many texts coming at me like nonstop from in academia, graduate school, just an endless array of leftists and Marxists and postmodernists and feminists texts, just like, basically pounding me with this stuff on a regular basis for me to actually take the hook and then become, very firmly, staunchly behind the agenda.
So it's interesting, for the uninitiated, you got Hegel, who's like big phenomenology of spirit guy,
Right.
sort of these grand invisible forces moving the world.
Right.
The closest that you got to materialism was sort of Napoleon riding in, triumphant on his horse and like,
Exactly.
okay, well, I can touch this guy. And he says, that's the spirit of the world on horseback.
Right.
And so Marx comes along and goes, well, actually, it's all explicable by the visible world, by tangible, concrete things.
Right.
Interesting, though, the famous quote coming out of Marx, all that is solid melts into air.
Right.
So like capitalism becomes the bad guy because
Right.
it makes everything sort of invisible. And yet, who's filling up the world with all of these kind of ideas, all these concepts,
Right.
just sort of an endless kind of deluge of critical analysis? Well, it's those guys, right?
Yeah, I'm actually, the interesting thing is that, capitalism is providing the whole playground for Marx and giving him, the fodder with which he could build his ideas. Without it, he doesn't exist. In fact, that's pretty much what he said. So capitalism is the forerunner, and it's the necessary precursor to his whole way of thinking. It's interesting that he is so scathing towards it because it is really the prop on which his work rests.
It's interesting to me, at least, having been through academic political theory myself and having the scars to tell the tale. Marxism is really sort of back in the public consciousness right now, especially on the right. This is cultural Marxism.
Right.
This is it's kind of funny to me where it's like critical thinking good, critical theory bad. I'm sort of like, okay.
Yeah.
So do you think that's right? That this emphasis on is it all reducible to sort of some flavor or another of Marxism? The problem.
There's so many other elements coming in. There's the basic ethos of like the oppressor, oppressed, this dyad, this oppressor dyad.
You're either oppressing or being oppressed.
Right. And so that, in Marxist terms, of course, that's the capitalist class and the proletariat. This gets transmuted into identity terms with postmodernism and identity politics. But there's more to it than that. I think that Marx would probably be disgusted by the left, the contemporary left, to be honest.
Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
So you bring him back, you thaw him out, you take him for a walk around, Greenpoint or Berkeley or wherever. What does he say?
He says basically these people are they're caught in ideas. They think that ideas will change the world. They think that identity is permanent and that it's meaningful and that it can serve as a wedge to change society, whereas that's, to him, identity would be a trap. It's actually a dead end, a cul-de-sac. It's something that he would say that has to be eradicated.
This is like false consciousness.
It's false consciousness, indeed.
Okay, something else, I got to touch on this. I mean, a lot of guys on the right sort of arguing about what counts as Marxism and what doesn't, and trying to find the root of it. Inevitably, sort of like, well, Marx was like the, secular Jew, and so this is kind of like, if you're looking for where things started to go wrong, sort of all these Christians turn to kind of post-Christians because they're all taking notes from the secular Jew. Well, you got Friedrich Engels sitting right there too, and I think Engels is like sort of bizarrely neglected or ignored, even though there's kind of among the post-hipsters on the left, there's this vogue for like sexy totalitarians when they were young Joseph Stalin, like what a hottie. I mean, Engels looked like he could be walking around in Greenpoint or Berkeley right now. And you look at this guy, and stop me if this sounds familiar. Sort of like rich parents, kind of helicoptering, supporting him financially, worried about his future, but they let him sort of travel around, bum around, hang out with the radicals. They support him financially to sort of sit at home and write this fan fiction, this sort of like, Protestant Gnosticism, sort of post-Christian, we'll bring heaven down to earth again and it'll be great. That's a big part of what's really going on with what's described as Marxism, and it doesn't really have anything much to do with secular Judaism, right?
No, not much. It's Marx was a very serious critic of Judaism. He called it practical. He called capitalism practical Judaism. So he was very much a critic of that. But going back to Engels, really, Engels is the first woke capitalist, really. We have now this phenomenon where the corporate world is embracing leftism in general. And here we had Engels doing this. I mean, he was a factory owner. He owned a factory. And he supported Marx almost entirely. And he even took the blame for an illegitimate son that Marx had with his caretaker, with his maid, in effect. So, Engels is a very interesting character with reference to today's woke capitalist movement.
Well, one of the good things, I guess, about Marxism is if you're deconverting, it's a much more painless process than detransitioning from gender surgery or whatever.
Yeah.
So nevertheless, I'm sure it was painful in its own way.
It's still torturous
for you. Yeah. So like, how long did it take? What was it like? Did you have dark nights of the soul?
It's like coming out of Plato's cave. You're looking at the third remove of reality, a kind of facsimile of a facsimile, a shadow of a facsimile. And you come out and you're dazzled. Your eyes are opened for the first time. The scales fall off and you start to see things that it hurts.
Was there a special someone in your life who led you out of the cave?
Well, I would say actually it was Ludwig von Mises. So nothing romantic.
Right. But an intimate relationship nevertheless.
Yeah, nevertheless. But actually the left did more to me, did more for my conversion than anybody. I think it was a trauma. I suffered a trauma, and that trauma actually opened up my eyes. They did for me what I couldn't do for myself.
Was there a moment where you doing some direct action or just like moldering away in the faculty lounge? Like where did you find yourself when you started to realize that things were not as they seemed?
I was in a hotel. It's called the Jane in New York because I would actually commute to New York from Pittsburgh for a while at the end. Because I just didn't want to be up there that much. So I stayed at this hotel called the Jane.
It's a classy spot, not very Marxist digs.
Yeah, that's right. I'm walking around this hotel and I thought, if I start to say what's on my mind as an NYU professor, all hell will break loose. And sure enough, it did.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah.
How did it start? How did you break the seal?
It started when I made this Twitter account, the anti-PC NYU prof, and started making these tweets. And I effectively started to let things rip. I had bottled up so much, so many ideas and independent thoughts, critical thoughts about leftism, about the gender ideology, about the safetyism, and so much about the left that it was just driving me crazy.
And this was what year that you started to
2016 in the early fall.
Yeah, great timing.
Yeah, it was perfect timing. And, to call yourself anti-PC at NYU is just utter heresy, first of all.
Sure.
And so they came after me. What happened is they started, a reporter basically started trying to figure out who I was. And then Vector came out.
Yeah, they do that. That's journalism.
That's what they do. Those good ones do that. So they're better than most.
The fifth estate, the branch of government, the secret police part. Yeah.
So then they just came out and asked me, "Who are you?" And I met with them and we had this interview and I let it all rip. And that's when the administration, the faculty, it came down on me like a ton of bricks. It was intense.
So it's 2016.
Yeah.
You're taking the plunge. Did you
Right.
go like full MAGA, or did you sort of pass through like
I was a Marxist in
libertarianism? Sometimes
September.
people do that.
I was a Marxist in September, and I voted for Trump in November.
That's incredible. How was that campaign? Were you like on board from like coming down the golden escalator? Like, was there a moment where Trump sort of clicked for you?
Well, to me, it was like I liked the irreverence of it right off the top, because I just like that. I just have like an irreverent streak. So when he came down the elevator and started talking about Mexicans and all this stuff, how they're criminals, and I was like, wow, this guy's nuts. And I was like, this is really something else. And then when they started coming after him, but what really was the turning point, though, was actually Hillary Clinton when she talked about the basket of deplorables. That's what flipped me right there, because I said, those people are my people. Those are the people I really identify with, not you coastal elites like Hillary Clinton, who disgusted me, So whenever she said that, I flipped. That was it. I was on board.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is sort of another one of those things for me where it's like, if you look at the New York scene, like Dime Square and all that, I don't know if you keep up with sort of what the youngins are up to, but there is this kind of like psychotic sort of bent in some cases where it's like, I may be trans, but I say the N-word, so I'm based. And it's like, hold on a minute. But I've seen, watching this sort of attempt at a resurgence of a kind of rebelliousness in politics in New York, where like young people are like, the left is lame, like it's so predictable, it's so played out that we will just make that sort of hard right turn, even if it's really nothing that much different from what punk was in the early 80s.
Yeah, it's aesthetic.
Yeah, and so, you see a guy like Trump, you're kind of a detransitioning Marxist. You go like, wow, someone who's actually like gets my pulse pounding a little bit, is a little bit unpredictable, in short, has charisma.
Right.
And you go back to the 60s and 70s, like, as well as anyone, like all of the charisma was on the left.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of the sort of creatives and the geniuses and the artists and, is novelists, painters, architects, just everywhere you turned.
Except for
if
Tom
you
Wolfe,
wanted,
maybe.
yes, he was the one guy. And he had to like wear the suit and the whole thing in order to like signal furiously that he was not like the others, not a square. What happened? How is it that we went from an America in which pretty much every single creative artist, genius, public figure who had something to say, like when you go back and look at what the scene around Bob Dylan, those folks will be like, well, if you didn't have something to say, you would not make it in music, no matter how talented you were.
Right.
And that's how you need to understand the whole Bob thing.
Right.
There's like one anecdote, one guy, he was like, Bob called him up and he's like, hey, you want to come on tour with me for the circus thing that he was doing? And these are old New York friends. The guy was like, well, sure, but like, what's in it for me? And the answer turned out to be, well, like I got a leather jacket at the end of the tour. Like this was like not a sort of, Austrian economics world. This is like all about the vibe, all about the charisma, and all about having something to say and doing so in an artful way. Yeah. Now we're in a time when the left has been just castrated with regard to that kind of unpredictable creativity and genius. Yeah. And some of it's trying to make its way over to the right, but this is very uncertain times. Digital's kind of changed media in a way that people really don't know. Should I write a novel? Is that cringe now? Like, how do you assess where we are moving culturally and how that has like implications for politics right now?
Well, what I think happened was that the establishment, for lack of a better term, used Trump as a foil in order to effectively make them look like they were that they were oppositional to everything that Trump was, like racism, sexism, misogyny, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what they managed to do was get the entire left backing everything about the establishment, including neocons at this point. So they've got the leftists basically supporting, the military-industrial complex, the alphabet agencies, war, corporate, big tech, corporate wokeness. They basically have them signed on to the whole panoply of establishment interests.
It's been really incredible. I mean, you look at what they did to Bernie Sanders, like look how they massacred my boy. Right. A lot of these sort of the dirtbag left or whatever you want to call them.
Right.
They're big mad, but ultimately couldn't stop it. Right. Sanders has been totally, they got him on his hands and knees with a leash. Is that kind of old school, unreconstructed sort of more populist Marxist character, is that person ever coming back?
I don't
on the
think
American
so.
left?
I think that's gone. I think that the populism will stay on the right for the foreseeable future, because I just don't think that the left has become so identified with the establishment. There's no space between them, and so you're not going to see populism on that side. You're going to see a lot of what they're doing is they flatter the left basically by telling them your ideas are right, you're the intelligent ones, you're the intellectuals, you're the scholars. This flattery goes a long way in seducing leftists into supporting the current thing, and particularly the establishment's current thing. It's a remarkable transformation that's happened over the past. I mean, I look at myself and I go, in some ways, I'm more left than these people still, because I'm anti-war. I'm pro-market. That's a difference. That's one of the major distinctions. But I still despise the intelligence agencies and the the state bureaucracy and on and on. But they don't. So.
Well, this is sort of like, you got Donald Trump out there right now going like, am I a conservative? Like, oh, no, it's common sense. Like, that's what I am. You see these categories of left and right. And, being a sort of intellectual historian of sorts yourself, these things, the right and left are not these like platonic forms. This emerged out of the revolutionary French democracy and kind of staggered on and became these other things, and just the way that they've been used and abused, sort of taking leftists and turning them into into members of the Borg. Like, are these categories of right and left going to survive?
They're not. That's a great point. And I get this a lot from people in arguing. When I say left here, what I mean is people that identify with leftism. Okay, now they would tell you they're leftists. That's basically the point. But you're right. There's no platonic ideal form of leftism or rightism. These don't exist. This is whatever they are, and that's in the moment. They're historically transmutable, and they have transmuted quite a bit. So what I would say here is that it's not the left that I oppose. For example, it's not leftism per se that I oppose. I would say that I oppose statism more than I do leftism. And it just so happens, though, that leftists are statists. So there it is.
I think about Constantinople in the bad old days when it was the blues versus the greens, sort of like two different, cheering for different contenders in the games, and then it turned into sort of like street riots and almost a revolution.
Right.
Like, what's a blue, what's a green? Well,
exactly.
it's this mob versus that mob.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, you like Cornel West is a guy who is sort of like that last figure. I think I always forget, it might have been like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who he like hounded off of Twitter by just calling him a neo-lib over and over again until he gave up. He's running for president, kind of a free-for-all right now. Do you see the left settling around Joe Biden until further notice? Do you think that Gavin Newsom's kind of going to be subbed in? How do you size it up?
Let me give you a nice little anecdote about Cornel West first. I was sitting in a church in Brooklyn, and Bob Avakian, the head of the USA Revolutionary Communist Party, was speaking, and I'm sitting right next to Cornel West. He was...
What year?
This is like 2014,
Great,
15,
okay, sure.
Right in there. Yeah. And then Cornel West subsequently had a debate with Bob Avakian about Christianity or religion, basically. But Bob Avakian is disgusting. He's this vulgar, screaming, nasty, very, very, he's just a disgusting human being. He hates any religion, and he'll bash it endlessly. And Cornel West and he had a debate about that. Anyway, I don't think that brand of leftism or that brand of the Democratic Party will ever fly again. It's done.
You want to talk about race? Let's talk about race.
Sure.
Cornel West. I've had a few. I've crossed paths with Cornel a few times. Big fan of Alexis de Tocqueville, Cornel West. So you know, I did a Tocqueville book, and so we had some sort of a brief bro moment. And he's a big hugger, so you know, he's the best we got. You know, Alexis de Tocqueville.
Right.
But you know, also a big fan of jazz, and jazz as a vehicle of this sort of deeply rooted spiritual, public-minded engagement. So you know, a love supreme. Like, well, what is that? What does that mean? How can we sort of rehear what was being said? You know, on that record or records
That's
like
a great
it.
question.
I don't think you've gotten into music at all. You seem to have done just about everything else. But you know, sizing up the way that Black America has been just used and abused, and in some ways, I think just spiritually broken. You know, not everyone, but you just look at the wreckage, and almost like they were sort of trying out this way of just, you know, buck breaking a people. And if you can do it here, then you can do it anywhere. You can set up franchises, and that's now the model for governance. Is that going to continue? And is there a light at the end of the tunnel for Black America?
Well, that's a great way you characterize it. That's precisely how I see it. I see that they've basically been a people that have been experimented with, and they've been, you know, not just the Tuskegee experiments, but you know, in every respect, they're kind of like in a social test tube, and they're being, you know, played with. And the last thing that they're doing with them of late, that is to say, is using them as weapons against the majority. This is the key. They weaponized blacks, and it's being done by the elite, I think. It's not being really marshaled or initiated by blacks, but they're weaponizing them and attempting to inflame total resentment and disgruntlement and you know, basically anti-white fervor in order to bring down this white majority and to break it up, its power, because that represents an impediment to the global elite's agenda.
So here's statism in its purest form. Although I do want to ask you, like, just, you know, for the sake of the zillions of human beings who will watch this segment between now and the end of time, what do you mean by statism? Like, how do we know it when we see it?
That's a great question. So the state has its own interests, and it attempts to perpetrate itself just like any other organism or organization. It looks to increase its size, its power, and so forth. And so I look at statism as any kind of contribution to increasing state power, increasing state influence, size, scope, penetration. So I think that statism is actually the enemy. It's not capitalist class, as I used to think. I used to think the capitalist class was the ruling class, and now I don't. I think the ruling class is demonstrably the state plus its favored partners, its favored elites, and that's who we're really up against. That's who's manipulating different segments of the population, like Black Americans, in order to weaponize them against the majority, because they definitely want to break up the power base of the white majority.
So I want to get into the weeds of the Great Reset here, of course.
Sure.
Mitt Romney, probably the best thing he ever said. The weeds are important, but I want to back into it a little bit. Just do the statism thing a little bit more. How do you fight it? I mean, this thing has just grown and grown. The administrative state, or the Borg, or the Blob, or the IC. You know, all these kinds of different names. Maybe we have too many names. Maybe the search for names is conservatives are getting hung up on, if we can just name it. Then we can fight.
Exactly.
There's a little bit of that. I understand advertising is important, and you want to be able to bumper sticker it, and that's okay. But if you have too many bumper stickers, you're the crazy leftist person with the Volkswagens just blanketed. Okay, we got this thing. It's expanding. It's setting up franchises. The state can almost just create more of itself by saying that is now the state. Just nationalize it, right?
Exactly.
So how do we fight it? Like, where's the seam? Is there a weak point? You know, what's the metaphor? Where do we begin?
It's not. I don't think it's fought in the way that leftists fight their battles, which is by virtue of collectivism and centralization. They try to take on the center, and they do it, you know, in a collective manner. So I think that the only way you beat the state is by withdrawal. It's decentralization. It's not literal necessary secession, but the spirit of secessionism and decentralization is how you beat the state.
So this is actually like really controversial now. If you especially if you get a drink or two in people who are like out there trying to make a life as a movement person. There are a lot of folks, and some of them, friends, I respect them more. We need a Alinsky for the right.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need George Soros of the right. We need open society. We got to have our own NGOs. We got to have our own long march to the institution. They really have become convinced that the left won because they got the tactics right. They got they figured out how to fight the war, and so we got to imitate them if we want to beat them.
The right-wing long march to the institutions. Yeah. I don't buy it. I think that basically these institutions can be discredited by virtue of withdrawal from them and the establishment of parallel structures, parallel economic, parallel cultural, parallel other structures. I think the academia for example, to try to take over academia, it's like trying to take over rot. I mean, what are you going to do with it? It's destroyed. So I don't see any point in trying to rescue these institutions from the damage that the left has done to them.
Well, look, as far as it goes, I agree with you. There is pushback, and I've gotten some of it, and you gotta wrestle with these things. You got those grill Americans out there who, leave me alone, I just want to grill, I can't hear you, America's collapsing, but I've got my McMansion, I've got my neighborhood, I've got my bowling league or whatever it is. Yeah. Dating myself. Well, isn't the state just going to come and squish those people when they get around to it? Isn't withdrawal just going to leave you with this sort of rump, and then when you shrink to a certain size, they can brush you off the table?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so the idea here is like, I look at this, there's kind of two prongs. One prong is to try to establish like a parallel structure, like the Amish in effect, without necessarily becoming entirely Luddite. But nevertheless, they have the right idea in the sense that they've got the state off their back, but they are being attacked. So it just goes to show you that way of life is actually a threat. Anything that tries to withdraw from the state is a threat to the state. They won't let you out. Totalitarians do not like to let people out. That's why they built the wall around the Soviet Union. And that's why they try to get a global system now. Speaking of the Great Reset, they want global governance, which means totalitarianism. Once you have a total system and there's no outside of it, that's totalitarian. So there's a two-pronged thing. You have to both do your own thing, decentralize, and you still have to fight back against the efforts that they're making.
Just in the spirit of courting still more controversy, you look at the Mormons. Mm-hmm. Here's a group of people who did exactly what you said. You go withdraw, you sort of middle of nowhere, build from the ground up, really tight community, really thick layers of trust, right. Stockpiling food, stockpiling money, they got a huge endowment, sort of self-contained society, and then somehow, at some point you wake up and you go like, well, wait a minute.
Mitt Romney.
you got Mitt Romney, you got who's staffing the CIA. I mean, there's some practical matters. Okay, they know how to travel, they speak multiple languages, they keep their nose clean, et cetera, et cetera. But this goes back before that. It's like Howard Hughes. Like there are reasons, and suddenly this group of Americans that is sort of in one sense quintessentially the survivalists who have withdrawn from state life. Somehow became really deeply ensconced in the hardest to dislodge part of the state, and that's part of the state that is least capable of being penetrated by public opinion, by representative government, by democracy. How do you stop that from happening?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think you have to do it with, you have to have principles. So you got to look at the state as a kind of metastasizing blob that's always going to try to resume and co-opt and absorb to basically sublate, to use a Marxist Hegelian type term, sublate its remainder, the excess or whatever. It's always going to try to subsume it. So, it takes some principles to resist. And I think it's very enticing when people are offered power they'll take over the organs of the very machinery that they thought was evil.
Especially when the choice is just getting zeroed out, right?
Right.
All right. Well, we've set the table, I think pretty well. So the Great Reset, remind us, what was it? Did it happen? Is it done? Where did it come from? These are, it's so easy to forget these things because there's this veneer of normalcy that's been restored, and we know that it's not real, but it's there.
Right. So to answer your questions, it's ongoing, it's underway, it's not finished, and it's in effect. So it is an attempt on the part of the World Economic Forum and the UN and its corporate partners, over 1,000 corporate partners that they've signed on, including the top asset managers of the world, BlackRock Inc., of course, and Vanguard Group, and all these corporate players are all on board with rolling out this system called stakeholder capitalism. And that was Klaus Schwab's brainchild in 1970 in his book. It was innocuously titled The Corporate Management Enterprise in Mechanical Engineering, of all things.
What could go wrong? In
this book, he drops this idea of stakeholder capitalism, which is a real misnomer. They want to roll out this system, and it's there's a lot of different ways to understand it. One way is to understand it as the WEF's public-private partnership routine to roll out and achieve the UN's 2030 Agenda, Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay, so what's the root of it, though? The World Economic Forum wasn't around forever.
Yeah.
Even George Soros wasn't around forever.
Right.
You have Dwight Eisenhower sort of on his way out the door. Would have been nicer if he'd said it on his way in the door, but he said it on his way out. Better than nothing. Hey guys, this might be a problem. Turning over political life, turning over the governance to scientists and experts who are especially expert in sort of killing vast numbers of people. Is that sort of where it began in the U.S., where it started to take root? Where do you see it?
I think it begins after World War I in particular with the Versailles Treaty. And I think that the development of globalist organizations come in after that war, and they decide that, look, we can't have this kind of warfare between nations anymore. The only real solution is a global system, global governance. And that's what the UN's been pushing since their inception. It goes back to, you can look at UNESCO, which was, one of the agencies, which is one of the agencies of the UN. The first director, Julian Huxley, Aldous Huxley's brother, basically says straight up, the only solution is world government. And so they...
You had H.G. Wells, the Open Conspiracy, all these guys.
All these guys have been pushing this for eons. So they look for global crises in order to justify global governance. So that's why they pick up on all of the different crises and they actually magnify them and exaggerate them, in some cases utterly fabricate them. Okay, so they used COVID as a pretext. Now COVID's gone for the moment. And now climate change is the big pretext. That was the original pretext for this, but they harp on these so-called global crises in order to justify the only solution which could be imaginable to treat or address a global crisis is global governance, and that's exactly what they're up to.
Right. So let me push you a little bit on capitalism then, because there are those who say, and not without reason, that a lot of these shenanigans and a lot of these sort of conceptual frameworks and a lot of the orchestration of kind of international collaboration around these kinds of goals ultimately boils down to, there were the wars, but who was making the decisions in the wars, who survived in the wars? It's finance. It's the big bankers, it's JP Morgan, it's all the rest of these guys.
Right.
How much do you buy that? How much of the root of the problem here is actually not sort of people with political power making decisions together, but is actually sort of a bank, international finance?
It's very difficult to say, so I look at the people that speak and act overtly, and that's not necessarily the bankers. So if the bankers are behind it, they have people that execute it. Okay, and so as far as I'm concerned, the people that are executing it are the people to watch. So you have, in the case of the World Economic Forum, you have Klaus Schwab. He's kind of like the quarterback on the field. They may be calling down the plays from the booth, but he's executing the plays. So if you want to stop the play, you've got to stop that. Whether they're puppet strings above him pulling his strings is really, I don't know that it's really material to the issue.
Maybe this is immaterial too, but do you think there are folks at that level who are just simply sincerely convinced that we sort of blew it, we screwed everything up, we tried imperialism and like that fell apart, and we tried like aristocracy, like that didn't go so well, and then we'll make the world safe for democracy. We tried democracy. Actually, we didn't make the world safe from democracy. Like that also failed, and now we're trying to give it to the robots, and like I don't know, like maybe that'll work. How many of these folks do you think just believe that it's kind of a mess, and this is the last attempt that the West has to kind of keep the wheels on the wagon?
Yeah, I mean, I think that these people have to sleep at night, and likewise, ideology is very powerful, and I think they could very well be subject to their own ideology, and likewise, they might be true believers altogether. So that's part of the answer to the question. In terms of this being like the last gasp, I think it's kind of like the denouement that they're looking for. That is to say, if they believe that this could solve like the world's crises. So what does Klaus Schwab say the main enemy of humanity is? It's not. It's what he calls disorganization. It's what he calls. I forget the exact term that he uses. Anyway, he used this term. And he used it at the penultimate annual meeting. He said basically, the problem is that people aren't all getting together on this. That there's disconformity, lack of conformity on the issue. So I believe they think that's really necessary. I do believe they are true believers. I don't think they go to bed and think, aren't we sinister, evil, wicked people trying to pull off this agenda? I truly think they think it's. They think it's benign or benevolent. They believe that they would be benevolent dictators.
I've talked about this guy before, and I'll talk about him again. Jeffrey Epstein's pet scientist, the guy who he brought over from the Institute for Advanced Study up to Harvard, and this is the guy who sort of like got him his key card and got him his office at Harvard and whatever. But like why this dude? And the answer is because he was one of these like top scientists coming out of, I think originally Prague, but spent most of his time in London, researching like this kind of collective action, sort of like collective consciousness, this like group altruism.
Right.
I think his big book that kind of broke him in that space was I think it was called like Super Cooperators, and it's basically like what can we learn from the bugs and from viruses, in order to learn how to like sort of put the entire human race in sync organizationally.
Yeah, that's the term I was looking for before. This is what Schwab thinks is the enemy is the lack of cooperation, whatever the term is for that he uses. But yeah, this is their ideal. They are collectivists through and through. They say this all the time. Collective good, collective benefit, collective, welfare, so forth. Everything is really conceived of in collective terms. So they don't want anybody going about their way, doing their own thing without some sort of plan, overarching plan that they're basically following. They don't want individual planning. They want collective, top-down, centralized planning.
Well, we got the world map back there behind you. I do not have a laser pointer here, but I wish that I did, because what I want to ask you is like, they don't have the whole world.
No.
Certainly not yet. And it's tough because a lot of sort of frustrated folks on our side are ready to just like white knuckle it all the way down the rabbit hole and go like, well, you have to understand, like everyone's really in on it, and like even the Russians. And but if you did have the pen and you sort of draw a circle, who's in it? Which of the
where's
countries?
the center? I'll tell you where the center is.
Sure.
It's Geneva.
Okay.
Geneva's the center, and this is where you have the banking interest, but you also have the World Economic Forum, but you have all of these other players that are involved in this plan. So that's your epicenter right there.
Okay, and then sort of like, help like the average American or even the above average American understand like where do they stand with regard to China? It seems like there's some of these folks are like, oh, we need to merge with them or we need to become more like them. Sort of in the way that, we need an Alinsky for the right. They're like, well, we just need to be more Chinese and then that'll sort of, and then there are others who seem like, well, no, we kind of need to like turn the Chinese into us. Where does that stand?
Yeah, that's great. I've written about this and I've spoken about this question of China. Where do they stand with reference to this Great Reset? There's a couple things. First of all, China's the model. That's the model for the West they're trying to roll out. This kind of what China itself calls socialism with Chinese characteristics, which is a kind of a corporate oligarchy with the state on top and a kind of actually existing socialism on the ground for the vast majority. That's your model for the Great Reset. So first of all, China's the model. Second of all, China and these globalists, the Western globalists and the Chinese globalists are using each other. They think, well, we're using China to achieve the Great Reset, the global governance, the global hegemony that we're looking for. And China believes they're using these Western globalists as well. So the question is, who's the useful idiot here? Will it be China or will it be the Western globalist elites?
Well, still competitive academic culture in China. Still a culture of like, make sure the boys don't turn into gay frogs or whatever. The idiocy level seems to be rising in the U.S. Saw a scary stat recently about, this is, IQ is certainly not the measure of the worth of a human being, but the share of people who are going to college and being graduated from college with conspicuously low IQs, it is rising, and at a certain point, at a certain scale, when you're up against someone like the Chinese, these things do start to have an impact on sort of like competence and can you run your own machines and like who's actually doing the military thing? Is it just sort of like we'll just make more bots? Who is ahead right now in the useful idiot sweepstakes between the U.S. and China?
I'd say that China's in the lead in a way because they don't, these globalists are deluding themselves to think that they would be able to use China's globalist ambitions against them in the end. I don't think that. I think that they would be basically your Stalin, and your useful idiots will be the Klaus Schwabs.
And then we can push things a little bit further and ask this: if you're one of these disillusioned, dejected Americans, you love your country or what it used to be. You're unsure where it's going, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere good. You size things up. You go like, well, I cast my vote. Maybe it matters. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe the system's rigged. Maybe it's not. I don't know. I'm just some guy. I have a family. I have a job. I try to find space for, for church and hobbies and feed my pets or whatever. Like, I'm just going to try to slowly back away and stay out of the blast radius. And if, if it all hits the fan, at least I can, put food on the table and go to sleep without having one eye open. Who are you rooting for at this point? If it comes down to like, well, the world is sort of hanging in the balance between the Great Resetters, the Borg that ate the West, or the Chinese who, they're Chinese and they're kind of their own Borg, but at least they're not trying to trans my son or whatever. Who are you rooting for?
I'm rooting against both of them. But they're both, so, globalism depends on statism, and it's only possible and only necessary because of these interstate factional conflicts. And that's what that's what these global resetters, the globalists use as the pretext for globalism. And so I'm against both of them. They're both statists, they're both globalists, they're both control freaks, and they both want, total hegemony over the population, over the world. So I'm in favor of those people that are trying to resist it by staying out of the blast. I don't blame you for trying to stay out of the blast radius. That's actually not a bad plan. You have to stay alive in order to pass on any kind of legacy to the future. And so I I think that's noble in a way. You have to live in order to have a legacy. So, yeah.
All right. So in very fine style, we've succeeded in saving the best for last.
Okay.
Not only are you rooting for neither of the big bads, you actually think that we have a genuine shot at turning things around, at least within sort of what we can put our hands on. You call it the Great Refusal.
Grand refusal.
The Grand Refusal.
Yes.
To beat the Great Reset.
Right.
Put some meat on the bones. Just walk us through. We got a few minutes here. How does a person sort of watching this, living their life, how do they participate in something like that? How do they know it's working? And what kind of time frame are we talking about?
Okay. So, let me get the premise down first. The premise is basically the puppet masters may be trying to pull your strings. The key is you have to disconnect the strings from yourself. This is really the only power that you have. You don't have the power to stop them trying to do what they're doing. So cutting the puppet strings. So what that means is resisting the panoply of technologies that they're foisting on us. First and foremost is the CBDC, the central bank digital currency. This would close the totalitarian circle and complete the whole regime. We must stay out of it. Now, that's easier said than done. That means you have to have a parallel currency in place with a parallel economic structure that will accept such a currency.
You think Bitcoin's the answer there?
It could be. I'm not going to say no. And then, it depends on the community. Like some might not accept it. Some might say, well, we'll take silver, gold, or Dogecoin, whatever works. Now, I know that's a heresy for Bitcoiners to say that there's any other crypto, but I'm not going to adjudicate that problem. I'm just going to say that we need a parallel currency to stay out of the CBDC. And then, of course, we have to resist all of these other transhumanist technologies where they want to have basically control over our organs and organ systems, including brain-cloud interfacing. Neuralink's real. That's brain-computer interfacing. It's just one step away from brain-cloud interfacing. Getting all these devices off your body, out of your body. This is absolutely essential. And then, of course, you have to refuse the ESG. Refuse ESG indexing in your banking, in your investing, and try to pressure the state for what it's worth, the representatives that we do have, to pull out of ESG as much as possible to bring down this ESG regime, because that just feeds the beast. The sustainability beast. Basically, we want to fight sustainability. Because when they speak...
It's unsustainable.
It's not. That's their sustainability. That's not yours. That's the key. So, yeah, and then, of course, it's just practice the free market in your life. You have to do that. And try to be as entrepreneurial as you can. You have to try to resist these institutions all the way through.
So it's going to be a fight, but when has it never been a fight, really?
It's never been off.
Yeah, I like Bitcoin personally. I think it's different. It's proof of work. It's not proof of stake. It's sort of like stakeholder crypto. And it's a powerful beast. This is a protocol that you can build, all kinds of stuff on. And just watching the way that they sort of, SEC comes along and they're like, we're going to step on you, and everyone goes, oh no, and they all sort of scurry away. And then who do you get? You get sort of every major financial services institution in the world going, just by coincidence, I'm applying to get into the Bitcoin business. So if we don't pick up that tool, these guys are going to pick it up instead and attach it to their marionette system. Okay, where can people find you? Tell us where they can find the book. I mean, you've got your choice of books to flog, so flog them all or flog the Great Reset.
I mean, everything is, I do not do, separate pages for my different activities. I don't do Substack. It's all on michaelrectenwald.com. All of my essays, all of my books, all of my interviews, everything is on there. And you can buy my books directly from me, avoiding, the middleman, avoiding Amazon and digital giants. And I send out signed copies. That's all. So I practice what I preach. My books. Let me just run through real quickly. Springtime for Snowflakes. It's a memoir. It's an academic memoir. It goes through my academic history, how I got into leftism and Marxism and how I got out. I think it's a fascinating read. Beyond Woke is a kind of compendium of essays. Thought Criminal is a novel about a thought criminal, and it's not based on anything autobiographical.
Of course not. Never.
But, and then The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty, which is my last work.
Very good. Just about zeros on the clock here, so that makes it all the time we have, at least until next time around, which is coming very soon. If you found this conversation meaningful, and who wouldn't, please consider becoming a BlazeTV subscriber to help us create more content like this. It will live forever, even outlasting us all on the servers of the future. Go to blazetv.com and use the code ZEROHOUR20, that's spelled out ZEROHOUR20, for $20 off your first year of BlazeTV. This is Zero Hour. I am James Poulos, and may God have mercy on us all.